Okay, welcome to the podcast of sorts. It's called the podcast of sorts because I don't really think it's a podcast. It's just a audio file at this point. Um, I did pitch the idea of making it a podcast to myself and to the few people who saw it on Twitter, but it still doesn't feel like a podcast, and I'll explain. A podcast has this aura of structure where there are questions, there are topics, there are things to be discussed in essence. And that is where it becomes less more than an audio file, in my opinion. An audio file, um, two words, not the lover of audio, but an audio file is anything that produces sound when repeated back, or records sound when recorded, obviously. And so this is an audio file and not a podcast, and I call it a podcast of sorts because I don't plan on making it structured. I know that that's what's popular and that's what's interesting is to set down, this is what we're going to talk about today, and to maybe joke about something and have like an intro and have a structure like an essay. But I do so much work with structure that I want something that is easy enough for me to do right away, but still interesting, because that's the thing, is I like to ramble. I like talking and talking until my point is made. And that's something I've been wanting to do more often, is to just share. And that was the reason my blog was started. I don't know if a lot of people know that, but the reason the blog was started was because I wanted a place to talk about anything I was thinking about. And that was a great conduit for that. And it still is a great conduit for that. It's just, I began to worry about how well I was doing. Okay, maybe not worry. I wasn't worried, but I began to over. That's not it either. I just began to work harder on it, and it became less of a one and done project, and it became more intellectual. It became more of work, and that's great. That's why I don't want to say it was stressful or hard work. It was just fun. I liked it. It took a long time for me to produce a blog or an essay or an analysis or anything that's on my blog right now. And I want to continue doing that, but I want something else that's easy to do in one-offs, easy enough to just produce, edit a little bit, not too much, and then just throw into the world and call it a day. Because I do so much work that's long term, sometimes I don't feel like I'm doing enough in terms of writing and creating, that I want little things, which is why I've always wanted to be like an artist, in the sense of drawing, pen on paper, any of those mediums, because it has a more physical sense of progress. When you're writing a book, as I am right now, and hopefully it continues to be in the works, even long after this podcast has been uploaded, when you work on a book, it's kind of hard for me to tell how well I'm doing, how far I've gone. You can, yes, you can count the words and the sentences and the paragraphs that you accumulate, but at the end of the day, for me, it doesn't feel solid enough. It doesn't feel like I've made progress when I write those words, because they can be edited, they can be changed, they can be swapped for something else. Anything can happen to them. And so that's why I never felt like I made progress. Chapters, when I write chapter 1, chapter 2, that's more of a satisfactory goal, because I am accomplishing a large segment of the work. So I always try to push myself. When I wrote the first book, I tried to push myself to finish a chapter whenever I wrote. And that's asking for a lot, but you have to remember that my first book was only 20 pages long. So I really, I mean, that's the average pages for a chapter nowadays. So I really wasn't working that hard on the book. But it felt like solid progress, and I enjoyed that. And that would go the same with being an artist, is you draw a certain amount of the body and it becomes real. It looks real. It's no longer in your head. It's now a manifestation of your imagination, which is interesting, and I like that a lot. I think it's helpful for me to visually see how far I've come, and that's why I'm doing these podcasts now. It's not to make it feel like I'm doing more work for my book, but it's to make it feel like I'm doing work in general, so that something goes out into the world, regardless of what it is. It's essentially what my blog started out to be, but was never quite, for the reason of it just never, blogs became more than what I started with, and I don't think podcasts will. Hopefully not. I am too ambitious, I'll admit that. I do dream a lot about things that I can do, and my ambitions far outrange the extent of my work. Like, you dream of something and you're like, oh, I want to do that, and then you can't because you don't have enough practice in. And that's not a problem. Like for people in the long run, like me, it really isn't a problem. It's just a matter of not today, and that's a bummer because you want to do it today because you thought of it and you're like, that's interesting, and I want to do it today. And I'm just happy that this idea could be done today. It was started yesterday, and it just became a thing today, and that's awesome, and I like that a lot. And it represents branching out into new mediums that I'd never tried before, which was representative of 2016 as a whole. 2016 for me, creatively, not personally, emotionally, or anything like that, or physically, 2016 was a year of trying different things in sense of creativity. I did a lot of writing for things that I would never have thought of writing before. I did try writing lyrics. I did try writing videos. I did try, just things that were outside of what I'd done before. And up until then, all I'd done was, the cut and dry writing. And there's nothing wrong with cut and dry writing. I just use cut and dry in the sense that it wasn't different than what everyone else was doing. If you read a John Green novel, you know what I was trying to do. I was just trying to write. And I mean, John Green has great metaphors. But I'm just saying that they were just words on a page at the end of the day, and they led up to things. That's cut and dry writing, as easily as I can explain it. And so I wanted to do more interesting things with the end of my senior year of high school fast approaching. And so, like I said, I tried to write lyrics, I tried to do this, that, and everything, because I had the time to during my, I believe it was 2.5 months before I started school again. And that's a long time for me. Like, that's a long time, because we used to have only 6 weeks. And so I tried to make the most of it, really. And I'm still trying to make the most of it, even though it's January 13th. I am still trying anything that appeals to me. But right now I've kind of settled down and I'm working on a book. And happy about that, because it's something that's taken a long time. It's been one of the ideas that survived the cut, per se. It's not a finalist in any sense of the word. Like, I imagined a American Idol kind of elimination round, where you're eliminating the singers, and then you have like 2 or 3 that remain, and they move on to the next round. It's not at all a finalist. It didn't win American Idol. It managed to get past auditions, or it managed to get past the elimination of 64. You know what I mean? It's just an idea that I've been working on for a really long time, and it just hasn't seemed to leave me. And that's what I like, about being creative, or having a creative mind, or writing a lot. If we were to kind of work our way through the branch of it all, I like that ideas never leave. They don't ever really, really leave. So let's begin with retelling the origins of this story I'm working on. So it started off as an interesting analysis of robots and mechanical things in a science fiction aspect, and it was that vague. I didn't know what I wanted with it. I didn't know what was going to happen. It was like, what is it like to be a robot, per se? And I went from there, and I started pulling references, and I started pulling things that I would read and look into, and I still have a large pile of the things that I'm reading and I'm looking into are yet to be read, like Arthur C. Clarke's 2001: A Space Odyssey novel is something I'm looking into. I want to reread Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick as an example. These are things that would begin to refine what I wanted to look into. And that was the beginning of the year, or early beginning. And as that grew, it started developing legs, arms, hands, ears. You get the point. It started growing into something that was more tangible. It was more applicable to a. It was more specific, is what I mean. Not applicable. It was more specific. And so as it developed over the year, we're getting to midsummer when I had a lot of time. I started looking into my researches and my references more often, and things came up. Like ideas started sprouting, and I don't know if I want to share it just yet because I always have a weird relationship with sharing an idea because then I feel pressured to finish it instead of wanting to finish it. But to say as little as possible without adding any pressure, it began growing beyond vague. It began growing into more of an examination of a certain theme that I wanted to look into, and that was middle of the summer into fall. And then fall I kind of hit a rough patch where I hadn't really refined anything at that time. It just kind of sat there, but it didn't give up. And that's what I liked about it, is it didn't leave me. I didn't stop thinking about it. Even if I wasn't consciously thinking about it, I was still thinking about it because it was an idea that I wanted to foster more and I found interesting, and life somehow managed to continue piquing my interest. And so fall into winter, there was a slow period of time. And now in the fall, because fall is December, January, February, winter, sorry. In the winter, growth has hit again. I've finished some books that I've been reading, and I've listened to some albums, and I've looked into the references I've been meaning to look into, and more references have come up, and I've felt ready to hit the books, essentially, in terms of writing more effectively. And so yesterday, just wrote, and that went pretty well, I think. It brought about something that I hadn't expected, and I like that. So all that to say, it's just interesting how an idea doesn't ever really give up. And, even the same goes for science, math, STEM, anything in the human realm. It's not exclusive. Because if it was exclusive, then I don't think I'd be talking about it. Because it's like, wow, that's really high and mighty of you to talk about one thing that's only specific to a certain people. I strongly advocate that it's a lot like there was this play my friend performed, or it was a two-person scene that my friend performed in our high school drama class. And the premise of the play was this math genius, probably self-proclaimed, but I don't know. It was a two-man scene. It was really short. It was one act. And he was working on a dating site and how to best correct the algorithm so that more couples would last longer than they were at the moment. And so he was working on that. And his wife comes in, or his girlfriend, I don't remember the exact relationship, but she comes in and she starts talking about a different problem. She starts talking about, I believe they're marital issues, because the man was pretty stuck up, I think. I think he was very stuck in his ways and he just wasn't kind. But that's beside the point. She comes in and she starts addressing the issues she has with him, hoping that they can fix it. And the point that I'm bringing up with this is the play was called the donut hole solution, I believe, because they were discussing, the wife was discussing how she works at a bakery and how she makes donuts, and she's making these donuts, and she has this customer come in who is like, man, I'm just a university student, and I'm paraphrasing, of course. He comes in and he's like, man, I'm just a university student, and I can't figure out this math problem. And so she brings over a donut, he pays for it, and he gets mid-bite, and he realizes something, and he sprints away, as if to say eureka, essentially. And that is what I took away from it. I know that wasn't the point. The point was relationships or anything like that. But what I found interesting about that scene was how when you're working on something unrelated to your work, you always seem to find yourself back to your work because your brain then gets into a chore and it wanders. I want to use Albert Einstein as a reference for that, but I don't know the accuracy of this statement. But I do believe he, and I can fact check this, or you can check it yourself. Let's change it so it's not a real person. Let's say that that Jonathan Grisham walks into a bar and he's like, I'm stuck on this really important problem in physics and I can't figure it out. And so he just is like, let me wash your dishes or something. And so he starts washing dishes and he comes up with the idea that fixes the problem. That is what I wanted to refer as Albert Einstein, but I don't know the validity of the statement. But that's the same thing, is my recalling of the situation was Albert Einstein was working on the string theory, and he went out and did something mundane, and he came back with a solution to present to his theory. It may not have been the solution, but it was a solution, which is very true to life. I mean, obviously, because Albert Einstein was real. But it's the idea that, you dedicate so much time to something that you're like, I have to walk away from it so I can think about something else. And so you walk away from it and you think about something else, and then you come back because the idea is maybe not important to your brain. It's important to you, but your brain doesn't process it as important information. It's just information that you've been stuck with. It's a lot like having a song stuck in your head. You play a song a lot of times, like 20 to 30, and your brain, whether or not it registers that the dopamine being produced from listening to that song is associated with the song, it's still like, you've heard this a lot, and this is information I'm going to keep. It's like a code, but I'm not going to dive into that analogy. And so it hears the song a lot, and then it processes the information, and so when you're not listening to the song, you're back thinking about the song, because you've been poring over it so many times that your brain's like, for some reason, this code keeps showing up, so I'm just going to, like, send it out and see what happens, and, like, maybe they'll register it as important. I don't know. And that's how that works. That's how it worked for me, is, I was working so hard on this idea, and I started to worry that I wasn't good enough and all these things, and I was talking to a friend, and they're like, maybe you should just, like, try something else. Maybe it's just time to, like, move on, or, like, try a different medium, or, like, try a different idea. And I was like, yeah, I don't like that, but I'll do it, because if you don't like something, it doesn't mean you don't do it. You just try something else. And so I let my brain rest from thinking about the same freaking code over and over again, the same plot, the same story, the same character. I was like, nope, we're moving on. And so I took a break, and I didn't work on any idea for very long until a new idea for the old idea came in. And so I'm back with a wrench in my hand, tweaking bolts and, aligning the gears and making sure everything's in tip-top shape so that I can possibly proceed. And that's what led me to yesterday, is just writing, because I took a break. And it was rewarding. And that's, if you were to take anything away from this rambling, it's about taking a break, and I don't want to be cheesy or cliche. Even though I encourage those things, I want to be as original as possible in saying that, rest is one of those critically important things in the world, in human life. Maybe not in the world per se, because a shark never stops swimming. So that kind of invalidates my argument that rest is the most important thing in the world. But for us as humans, rest is really important. It's the idea that you can't work effectively if you don't sleep well. And that's much to my dismay. I'm very fond of sleeping. I don't like it. It's a waste of time, is what it is. I'd rather be awake doing things than slowing down and breathing and sleeping, because it's a waste of my time. But it's important, and that revolves back into the idea. I didn't want to stop working on my story. I didn't want to stop working on this book, but I had to take a break because I was tired of it, or I was tired of hitting my head against a proverbial wall. And so I took my break, and I came back at it with renewed energy. And that's something I'll be thinking about as I continue on is just, resting and taking a break for the sake of moving forward. It's really interesting, but it's true, It's been a true thing for so long. Even going back before modernized transportation, even before the horse-drawn carriage, any of that, when people used to walk days distances, uh, it was days before you got to your city or your settlement or anything, and so they had to take breaks, and it was opening themselves up to attack from bandits, animals, or nature, but they had to stop because stopping is what allowed them to continue, and that's a weird conflict of ideas, but that's the truth of it. And I have to sit on it. Ironically, is I have to let myself think about it, and I hope you think about it as well. If you're in a situation where you are hitting your head against a wall, or if you feel like you're not making progress at something, just take a break. Like refresh your energy towards something, so that you can combat it with strength, renewed strength, and prosper. It won't break right away, but it'll break eventually. Most things break eventually. And if it doesn't break, it wasn't meant to break. That's the purpose of something that's not supposed to break. It shouldn't break. If it breaks, there's a problem. So, I just want to leave with that thought. I'm kind of coming to the end of all the things I kind of wanted to talk about. I hope that this ramble session, I suppose, was interesting. I like talking to myself, I'll admit. And I should have started with this, but alas. I do enjoy talking to myself. I find it to be therapeutic, and I don't find it narcissistic um, at all, because, it's not because I want to listen to myself talk, and my throat gets dry, and it's not worth as much as I put into it, but it's mostly because I retain my thoughts more easily. Um, I'm able to remember the things I said out loud because they occupied a space outside of my brain, which is such a chaotic place. So it's just better for me to ramble. And I thought, well, I might as well just put it into a space outside of air, like the void, for example. And so I hope this works. I hope it goes well. I enjoyed it. I think this was an interesting dive into things I hadn't really effectively considered. And I imagine one of these podcasts, I'm gonna have a revelation on my microphone, and you guys are just gonna be sitting here listening to it, and I think that's gonna be interesting. It'll be very indicative of an artist's journey. It's a lot like how, excuse the ramble again, or the sidetrack, but it's a lot like how the more current books from John Green were documented on Vlogbrothers. His journey was documented on Vlogbrothers, and I always found that interesting. Abundance of Catherines, he won, or he was nominated, and that was documented. That's one of my favorite videos from Vlogbrothers. Um, Not only because I aspire to get to that point, and I really enjoyed the joy it gives me watching it, but also because it's documented. That's a revelation that the previous video John was in, he didn't know he was going to get, and then in the next video, boom, he got it. And so it's just interesting to see where things take you when you don't expect them to. So, I, once again, hope you enjoyed this podcast of sorts. I will most definitely try to make one more, or I will most definitely make one more, and if it isn't interesting, then, we'll just sever ties and go our separate ways. But if it is interesting and people enjoy it, and they want to spend 20 plus minutes listening to me ramble about whatever I start talking about, then I will continue doing it for as long as possible. Because that's the essence of my blog, is I'm going to keep blogging until someone's like, dude, this is not interesting anymore, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with being told it's not interesting. I just want to know. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, and I will hopefully see you next time. See ya.